Hello and welcome to Biblical Justice A to X. This video series presents a wide range of topics from abortion to xenophobia from a biblical perspective. Global Justice is pleased to offer this year-long series with monthly topics through this webinar and also through our social media and website. To kick off our series, we are pleased to be addressing the issue of abortion. Obviously, this topic is extremely important and hotly debated, but we hope that today's discussion will give you greater insight and greater opportunities to consider the biblical context behind this very difficult and troubling issue. We have with us to present this on this topic an individual who has expertise not just on the topic of abortion, but more broadly on the topic of bioethics. So we're pleased to welcome Paige Comstock Cunningham. Paige, welcome.
Thank you. It's so great to be with you.
Well, we want to take a moment, Paige, to give some background on yourself and then also to give you an opportunity to share a little bit about the center. So let me start with you. So Paige Comstock Cunningham is not only a JD but a PhD candidate and is the executive director of the Center for Bioethics and Human Dignity. She is a trustee of Taylor University. She has been an affiliate professor at Trinity Law School and Trinity Graduate School. And she's also been an adjunct instructor at Wheaton College for 8 years and has been past president and board chair of Americans United for Life. Paige has graduated from Taylor University summa cum laude and also earned her JD, that's Juris Doctorate, from Northwestern University Law School, as well as an MA in bioethics, also summa cum laude, from Trinity International University. In addition, Paige has published numerous articles, editorials, and book chapters in the areas of law, bioethics, and public policy, and has been featured in a wide variety of publications, television programs, and radio programs. In addition, she has lectured widely, both nationally and internationally, particularly on the topics of bioethics, public policy, reproductive ethics, abortion, and global women's health. Some tremendous background and some tremendous experience, Paige. Thank you again for being with us.
Thank you for inviting me to have this conversation.
Thank you. And would you mind telling us a little bit more about your work at the Center for Bioethics and Human Dignity to give us some context before we get into our topic?
Sure. Oh, I'd love to. I always love talking about the work of the center. The Center for Bioethics and Human Dignity, or CBHD as I would call it for short, is a Christian bioethics research center. And as such, we have two primary prongs. One is to ensure that a Christian understanding of bioethics is attended to by the academy. That's doing that academic scholarly work to make sure that notions and understandings of human dignity are not undermined. But the second part is what I call the translational work. That is to help the church live out what we believe about human dignity. Those everyday choices about our interactions with medicine, science, and technology that all of us are going to have to make at least once in our lifetime. But we can't usually predict when that will come. But because we do have to face those decisions, I feel that it's our responsibility at the center to help people have the tools to think through kind of the big questions, the big moral questions, and then the more specific tools to help them in the immediate situation.
Thank you so much for that backdrop. Well, I want us to go ahead and get us started right away on our topic. So as we know, abortion, really difficult, very controversial, very provoking. Maybe it might be helpful to just sort of set the stage on the topic, maybe some facts and figures or something to help us understand why abortion is such a significant topic.
Well, first of all, my interest in abortion goes back decades, and I came to it as a law student as a matter of civil and constitutional rights, but today we're going to talk more about the biblical justice perspective. But I kind of want to set the stage on what is the status of abortion now. And I'm going to look away for just a little bit to get these facts and figures right for our listeners. To date, there have been about 58 million legal abortions in the United States. So that would be since 1973 when the Supreme Court legalized abortion in all 50 states. And the good news is that the number of abortions is going down. We're going to talk about the worldwide numbers a little bit later in our conversation. But I wanted to talk first about the legal status because some things have changed since 1973 when the court decided that the unborn child is not a person, that they don't have constitutional rights that would outweigh any right that the mother may have. Now, you may have heard that the court decided that abortion is only legal during the first trimester or the first 3 months. Well, that's true, but that's not the whole truth. In that decision, and the companion case called Doe versus Bolton, the court essentially declared abortion on demand throughout pregnancy. And what that means is that the court said that the state could prohibit abortions after viability, except, and it's that big exception that swallowed up the rule. And the exception is except for the mother's life or health, and then it very broadly defined health for psychological, emotional, any kind of reason that the woman could bring up. So essentially, if she claimed emotional or psychological distress, she could legally have the abortion if she could find someone to perform it. Well, the good news is that abortions have been going down. The rate has been going down. The number of teenagers getting pregnant and getting abortions has been going down. So that's really something to celebrate. And in 1992, about 20 years after Roe versus Wade, the Supreme Court opened the door to further state regulation. And we've seen a lot of successes in the states regulating abortion, primarily in the interest of mothers' health. But, and this is something that a lot of people don't know, is that states also have been prohibiting abortions at 20 weeks or later than 20 weeks based on the medical understanding that from that point on, at least from that time on, the unborn child can feel pain. So you may have heard of the Pain Capable Unborn Child Act or just a ban at 20 weeks. And about 20 states have passed some kind of a 20-week or later ban on abortions. And of course, some of those are going through legal cases right now. So that's kind of a quick snapshot of where we are in terms of numbers and legally.
Thank you. That was very helpful. Just a quick follow-up. You mentioned that, even though abortion is a major issue, it is decreasing, and that's a good trend, but there's still somewhat large numbers of abortions each year. We have, I think, over 900,000 recorded abortions throughout the year. So what do you think is behind that, given that, we have access to, birth control, there are a lot of awareness programs. Why still such a high number?
Well, I think there are a number of reasons for that. One sort of obvious reason is that abortion is available. And in many states, it's funded. So things that are available and funded tend to be taken advantage of. The Hyde Amendment that has been passed annually for decades, since actually a Supreme Court case in 1980, which is the first case I ever worked on as a law student, ever since the Hyde Amendment, abortions have gone down in the states where they weren't funded. So it's basically saying federal funding does not have to pay for abortions. Another reason is that because abortion is available, I wonder if couples aren't as careful about birth control, because abortion has been seen, and this has been studied, but abortion has been seen as kind of a backup birth control. So we have it widely available, we have it as a backup plan, and then we also have women who get in situations where they just don't see any other good outcome. And so they don't desire abortion, and we'll probably come back to that, but they see that as the best of the really, or the least terrible option that she has. So I just think culturally abortion has become so accepted and so mainstream that it takes a very courageous woman to say, no, I'm not going to do that.
Great points. I want to go back to this idea of whether or not an unborn child is considered a person or not. I think to a certain degree, when we don't consider that that baby as a person, that might have something to do with the viewpoint of this as a sort of a birth control option, rather than something that's much more sort of a life and death kind of decision.
Absolutely. And again, so some of this goes back to the Supreme Court decision when the court said, well, since, when theology and philosophy and medicine can't decide when human life begins, we won't either, because the court very explicitly acknowledged that if the unborn child is a person, that child does have constitutional rights guaranteed by the 14th Amendment.
Right.
So the court said, well, we're not deciding that it's not a person, but in effect that's what they did. And by the court's separation of the unborn child's legal status from their biological and philosophical or moral status, that really kind of began the diminishment and disregard for unborn life. And we'll talk about this, but it has affected so many other areas of culture, and where we see the unborn child as less than a person and less than human and less than worthy of society's interests. It's now seen as just something that is completely up to the mother. This was another aspect of the Casey decision in 1992, when the court made it clear that it was the mother's own view of the mystery of human existence and of life, and what she thought unborn life means, and it's completely up to her to decide what she does with that life. Well, nowhere else do we let individuals determine the worth of another human being based on their own opinion. But that's what we have in the case of a culture of widespread acceptance of abortion.
Absolutely. Well, I think that might be a good segue to another sort of broader question. You mentioned that we're going to be talking about sort of the biblical justice view of this topic. We talked about the legal aspects and some of the facts behind this, but give me your biblical understanding of how to evaluate this topic.
Sure. As I said at the beginning, I came at this as a law student who didn't enter law school pro-life, but also not very well informed and not very thoughtful. But now, after having thought about this for many years, and in my own spiritual journey, becoming a mother and now a grandmother, I think I have a much broader view, and so I really wanted to unpack just a little bit, from my perspective, biblical justice and contrast that with social justice. Mm-hmm. We know that biblical justice is a huge concept, and as you mentioned earlier, it's very hard to define. Well, you know that the bigger the concept, the harder it is to define. It's really difficult to define human dignity. It's certainly nearly impossible to define God's love. And yet, that is an aspect of his character that's absolutely inseparable from justice. Because if you have love without justice, then you really have, it is a very soft, weak kind of compassion, but you really don't have genuine care for the person. If you have justice without love, it's very harsh. And justice and love are both essential to what we know about God and his character, and they must be wed together in biblical justice. And there are two other concepts that are almost always wed together in Scripture, and that is justice and righteousness. And we know from Amos 5:24, where the prophet says, "Let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream." Well, we sometimes want to have justice in achieving some kind of a just resolution in poor circumstances without that second part of righteousness. Because God is not only calling people to uphold his holy standards, but he's calling them to be his people, his righteous people. When he rescued the Israelites out of Exodus, which is, I'm rereading the story again right now, he didn't just save them from the oppressor, from the horrible situation they were in, from having to make bricks without straw. He was taking them into the desert, where he was going to show them, in the law that he was going to give to Moses, his holiness and his way of living, that it was laying out God's righteousness, of course, before we have the fulfillment of righteousness in Christ. But already there we see that coupling of justice or rescue and righteousness together. God expects a change in the behavior of the people who are receiving justice. It is not just to rescue them from their physical circumstances, but also to rescue them from their spiritual blindness.
Oh, that's well stated.
And there are now, to pull back a little bit from biblical justice, sorry I keep using my hands, I know it's a little distracting, but to pull back from biblical justice a little bit into unpacking some theological concepts behind that, there are different kinds of justice when we think about it. We can think of, say, meritorious justice, where somebody who works very hard deserves a reward for that. Or we say those who don't work don't eat. That's meritorious justice. But we also have a sense of egalitarian justice, which is, it could be either equal outcome. We want everybody to have a good outcome, but that means that there's going to be some unfairness, because maybe some people who are given more will have it taken away so that everybody will have the same at the end. Or we can have equal access, where everybody can have the same opportunity, but not everybody's going to get the same outcome because we are all different. And there is a third kind of justice, and there are actually many other ways to unpack it, but just for our purposes today, is justice based on need. And this is the one I think connects most closely with the abortion context. And that is a concern for those who are weak and vulnerable. The kind of justice that a person with Down syndrome merits is not based on effort compared with somebody who has normal cognitive ability, or equal outcome based on someone who can earn millions of dollars a year, but the kind of justice that we owe to those who are weakest and most vulnerable among us. And so the kind of justice we want to think about, we have to think about what is the context in which we're looking for justice. There's not a one-size-fits-all.
Mm-hmm. So taking that point a little further, so when we're talking about applying this concept of justice, in our general community, people understand social justice. They may not hear the term biblical justice as frequently. How do we distinguish that when we're applying it to this topic of abortion?
That's a really good question, because a lot of people immediately go to social justice, and it's very appealing today, and it has been for a couple of decades. That gets so many people, it just gets their passion going. They want to go out and correct some horrible harm, and I welcome that. But one of the differences I see between social justice and biblical justice is that social justice is concerned with the external. It's concerned with the factors that lead to oppression. It's concerned with policies that harm the vulnerable. And it is concerned to raise people out of poverty and to change their external circumstances, which is all well and good, but it's incomplete. Mm-hmm. Biblical justice is concerned not only about the external, all those things, plus the internal factors. The internal factors of the person who's helped, so that they may have not only a better life here, but a better life forever. But it's also concerned about the heart and motivation of the one who is doing the helping. Mm-hmm. So we have to be aware of our motivations. It's really easy to get involved in some of these justice issues because it makes us feel good. We can post about it on Facebook. We can talk about these great things that we did that give us all kinds of brownie points, if you will, all kinds of credit. But that motivation is more that we want people to think better of us. And those who are concerned about biblical justice don't care what the world thinks of them. They care what God thinks of them.
Now, for our audience,
let me just add one more thing. It's the heart of love. That's the most important part. I mentioned justice and love at the beginning. I want to end with the heart of love that motivates our passion for justice.
Absolutely. And I think that last point might be the most important when we're talking about this conversation that happens in our public between women's reproductive rights and this idea of the rights of the unborn. And when you talk about this sort of higher and broader concept of biblical justice, where that unborn also has inherent dignity and value. And that's probably different than the world would see that when we're talking about this sort of rights framework that's really more constitutionally driven rather than biblically driven. Comment on that?
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. Rights language is very useful, and it's very helpful in terms of a public language. But when it comes to abortion, we don't pit the rights of a child against the rights of her mother. Mm-hmm. That we see them as both individuals who are in need of love and care. The justice based on need is concerned about the weakest and most vulnerable, and the one who is most invisible and most vulnerable right now is the unborn child, because the most dangerous place for an unborn child in the world today is in his mother's womb, which is really sad. But I don't want to demonize mothers. Mm-hmm. Many, many times, and in fact, most of the time, women who get abortions didn't set out that day to say, hey, I want to have an abortion. They didn't set out to have behaviors that would send them a few weeks later to the abortion clinic. So we don't view women as some kind of a horrible person. I would never label a woman a murderer, as some would, but I think we have to look at the circumstances that drove her to that. Mm-hmm. And sometimes those circumstances are frankly horrific, where she sees that she has no other option. But the one thing that we can give her that the world doesn't offer is hope. When she sees no way out, there is still a way to paint a picture of hope, because the future that God has for her is a future of hope. I heard an Orthodox bishop say that you're not a person unless someone loves you. And at first I was shocked, but he went on to finish the quote, and he said, but remember this, if no one else in the world loves you, God loves you. And the reason we live, the reason we exist, is because of God's love. God's love is what sustains us. It's what gives us life. So no child is a mistake, and no child is unloved. We just have to expand the mother's awareness that God loves her child and God loves her.
Thank you for providing that sort of alternate perspective. I also want to sort of expand our conversation and talk also globally. The issue of abortion isn't just here in our communities in the United States, but it's also around the globe. So give us a little bit of that understanding of the global context of this issue.
Well, it's very sad, Sosima, that the United States imports not only our medical technology, our computer technology, but we import or export, excuse me, some of our worst values, including our values of abortion on demand. And these numbers are contested, so let me just lay out a few of them. The Ellen Guttmacher Institute, which is the research arm for Planned Parenthood, reports that there have been 3 million abortions so far this year worldwide, and over 1.4 billion since 1980. Now, Irina Grossu, who writes for Family Research Council, says this number is grossly exaggerated, and only 12.4 million can actually be tracked. And so what is being counted seems to be about 4 times higher than what we actually have data for. So it may be inflated for Planned Parenthood to support their need for funding. I can't answer that. What I can say is it is way, way too many. And there are pressures, now talking about the legal just a little bit, there are so many pressures on countries to expand their laws and to override their traditional religious and cultural values to expand access to abortion under the guise of reproductive rights or safe motherhood or access to safe health care services. They're using different kinds of terminology to avoid using the word abortion. But what we have seen happen with the women in the United States, we're seeing happen with women worldwide. And it's this pattern of objectification, commodification, and exploitation. And we see it happening to the unborn child, where first she's seen as an object, a sexual object. Then she can be commodified because a price tag can be put on her. And then she can be exploited and coerced and abused for the benefit of others. And abortion has created this. It has created a culture that coarsens everything it touches. And we see it happening globally with other technologies made possible because of our abortion culture that exploit women to, say, be trafficked not only as in human sex trafficking, but also egg trafficking or as gestational surrogates. So the global problem is a mirror of what's happening in the United States, but it is exploiting the poverty of so many women. And then I want to make one comment about gender side, but I want to see if we have some final things we want to get to, and then unpack that just a little bit.
Well, I actually, you sort of touched on the topic I wanted to touch on, which is there are some cultural distinctions when we talk about other regions that maybe we don't see in the same way here in the United States. And so I would really like to look at that issue of the gender concerns and how abortion is impacting that globally.
Sure. I mean, it is heartbreaking. The United Nations estimates that there are 100 million girls missing worldwide due to legal abortion. This is not counting girls that were aborted for health reasons or economic reasons. This is just because the parents wanted a son and they had a daughter. And it creates a terrible gender imbalance. And I'm just going to mention some of the countries at the top of the list that have so many more boys born than girls, that they have a huge imbalance, and many, many men of marriageable age with no brides for them. The three that top the list are Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Liechtenstein, of all places, followed closely by China, Georgia, Albania, Hong Kong, India, Pakistan. In some cases, it's for religious reasons. In some cases, it's for cultural reasons. In other places, it's to protect family property. Or in the case of India, it is because having a daughter is such a financial burden because of the huge dowry that the family has to pay in order to get her married off. So gendercide or sex-selective abortion it's grievous. Countries are trying to deal with it and stop it, but it is still continuing. A woman who tried to bring attention to the laws in Great Britain, this is not in China or India, tried to bring attention to the laws in Great Britain that doctors were performing sex-selective abortions in violation of the law. She is the one who was prosecuted, and the doctors went scot-free. So even speaking out against sex-selective abortion may come at a high personal price. So you can't be motivated by the praise of others. You have to be motivated by a passion to stop the harm and protect the unborn children.
Important. It's so difficult. It puts these women globally in such a difficult situation. I also want to add in a question about sort of the health status. You know, the public health conditions in other countries may not be the same as what we have here in the United States, particularly in developing countries. And so does that add another layer of public health concerns when you have abortions in these other regions?
Absolutely, but abortion doesn't reduce maternal mortality. I mean, you don't solve one problem by eliminating people. So there have been great efforts paid to maternal mortality. That's because that's often one reason given for abortion. Most mothers don't want abortion. They want to have safe and healthy pregnancies and deliveries and for their child to survive that crucial first year. So let's deal with the care of the mother, the care of the newborn, and community health projects that take into account all those factors that contribute to her being left in a vulnerable situation where she is desperate and feels that abortion is her only choice. And yes, we must continue to press governments to enforce their laws against sex-selective abortion, because that's sex discrimination pure and simple. And no one should be in favor of that, regardless of their views about abortion.
Absolutely. Now, let me add a question that maybe kind of links both our national concerns as well as our global concerns. To a large extent, many people relate this idea of pro-life as somehow connected to Christianity and not necessarily to other faith perspectives or other perspectives, political or otherwise. What do you say to someone who isn't a Christian about this topic and why this topic is still important for them to recognize, the value of life, etc.?
As a lawyer, I spent most of my years making the argument in public terms. I didn't bring faith into it at all. Mm-hmm. There are very sound philosophical arguments, but the simplest argument is that the embryo, the unborn child, is one of us, and simply to say otherwise is to discriminate based on size, saying it's just too small, or appearance, saying she doesn't look human. She doesn't look like me. So that's, appearance-based discrimination. We've run into problems with that historically. Mm-hmm. To say that the child can't think, doesn't have self-awareness, doesn't have social relationships, well, that's discrimination based on abilities and functions. And for the woman to say, well, it's my body, well, it's not her body. It's another little body growing in her body. But mm-hmm. to say, well, it's my body or it's in my womb, that's discrimination based on location. And so every argument that's given in support of abortion is a kind of discrimination. And I would hope that we can expand our minds to be more welcoming and more hospitable, and not less welcoming and less hospitable. Because to encourage a mother to think that she has this kind of ultimate power to end the life of a human being, whatever she thinks that that entity is, that actually makes her more vulnerable. Because when we jeopardize one member of the human race, in a discriminatory fashion, we jeopardize all of us.
Absolutely. And, when we talk about, the MLK quote, where there is injustice anywhere, there is a threat to justice everywhere. And, in a sense, this still fulfills that same statement. There is an injustice being done to the unborn, and so as a result, we have a broader concern of injustice everywhere.
Absolutely. And Dr. Martin Luther King did not live to see the genocide of the Black people, that they have 1/3 of the abortions and represent 12% of the population. They are aborting at a rate 3 times the rate of Hispanic and white Americans. So that there are many African American men and women who are speaking out against this injustice against their own race. That's not my privilege to do that from the inside, but on their behalf, I lament this great injustice that's being perpetrated on them.
Absolutely, and you just touched on a very important aspect of this topic, which is demographics. There are these sort of disproportional impacts that are happening, whether it's people of a particular racial category or people of a particular socioeconomic category. And so we are seeing larger numbers of, let's say, Planned Parenthood clinics, etc., in locations where you have poor people. And that also has an impact that's very difficult. And so would you just touch on that in our remaining time together?
Well, you're right. I mean, the origins of Planned Parenthood are really unseemly. They were eugenic. Margaret Sanger wanted to get rid of the children of the unfit, and at the time she's trying to do it through birth control, and abortion came in later. But it's that same philosophy. And you look at the number of clinics. Somewhere over 660 Planned Parenthood clinics that don't offer prenatal care or postnatal care. There are thousands and thousands of community health clinics that offer all the services that women need, and they're located in those same neighborhoods, but they're offering life-affirming services. And there are thousands of pregnancy resource centers that offer care for free. So you look at who is it that is stepping up to the plate to really care for women, to help them be the best mothers they can be for as long as they can, whether they choose an adoption plan or choose to parent, or there's a father who steps up to the plate to be in the picture. These are life-affirming alternatives where abortion always ends one life, and it's an irreversible choice, and it's a reality that that woman will carry with her for the rest of her life, whether she suppresses it or acknowledges it. It is something that happened.
Paige Cunningham, thank you so much for your insights and your expertise on this topic and related bioethics and global issues. We also want to thank our audience for taking this time with us for this important conversation on abortion. We hope you'll join us again next month for our next session of Biblical Justice A to X as we cover another critical justice issue. Thank you. God bless you.
Thank you.